Hi, I'm James Valentine. This is Life's Booming. Grab a cuppa and get ready for an amazing story. Are you ready? Here we go.
Mama sat motionless, staring at a photo in front of her for what seemed a long time. In the photo, she was sitting with my sister Wang on one side and me on the other. She took out the scissors that she had refused to turn into steel. She looked at me. Her lips quivered as if she was going to say something but couldn't. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her hands were shaking. Baba and I watched as she cut me out of the photo. The tears now rolled down her face. Baba lit another cigarette and fell back into his thoughts. "I'll save some rice tomorrow to glue the photos to the forms," said Mama. "We have to be thankful, even if only one of us makes it out." The smuggling of people from Macau to Hong Kong and from the mainland to the colonies was called snake business. Many civilians work in the people trafficking trade: rickshaw men, bakers, store owners, police officers, marine patrol officers, greengrocers, butchers, school teachers, even public servants, and of course the fishermen. Only God knew who else was involved or who was in charge of the snakeheads. Third aunt said it was too risky for father and son to be in the same boat. She then assured me that everything would be fine. "The sea will be calm and the wind will fill your sails," she said. She promised to keep the incense sticks burning until she heard of my safe arrival. The snakehead hurried us down a small ladder to the lower level. A doorway was opened into the diesel engine compartment. I stared at the opening, not much bigger than a dog kennel. "Go straight to the end," he ordered. On hands and knees, I scrambled over the slimy damp floor until I could go no further. "Quick, hurry up, now!" A few more people entered the crawl space behind me. I crouched down and tried to stop shaking. I took deep breaths, but the air was thick with dampness, mold, and diesel. Soon the sting of sweat and tears blended in. "Are we going to die?" someone asked softly in the dark. Slowly, the air seemed to have disappeared. All I could hear was the district head and his committee members shouting slogans denouncing Baba and me. I found myself floating in a strange but irresistible quiet, drifting towards a distant light.
Everyone has a story, but if you pass them on the street, you'd never guess what it is or how incredibly moving, in this case, both geographically and emotionally, it might be. The story that you're about to hear is being told to you from darkened jungle lands of the central coast of New South Wales, but it begins on the Pearl River Delta in China. This is Dr. Andrew Kwong's story of no regrets. Dr. Andrew Kwong, hello.
Hi.
Fantastic to meet you. I mean, it almost, I'm just thinking about the way we talk about China now and our engagement with China now. Chairman Mao's era seems so long ago.
Yes, indeed, it has been a long time ago.
Mao dies in what, 1976? What have we forgotten about the Chairman Mao era?
If we go back a little bit, it had been many, many, many years of sanction ever since 1949 until 1976. Basically, China was alone by itself. And after enduring 150 years of invasions, colonizations, it's multifactorial. It's not just one thing that brought on all these traumatic times I, as a young child, and my contemporaries had to go through. And the invasions didn't stop at the Japanese invasion, but before then there would be the others. And then, of course, the civil wars, and really bloody. And then after that, 1949, because by then the population, the whole China was exhausted. The country was so poor, wretchedly poor, and nothing left except ruble.
Yeah.
So Chairman Mao gave hope to a lot of people, to all of us, including myself as a young child and my parents as young university graduates, and they wanted so much to help rebuild China, to bring on a fair living and so on and so forth. But because their education was from the previous era, so they were not accepted. And plus, it's very complex.
Yeah.
In a revolution that's extended from 1949 onwards, that they did the cleansing, they did the persecution, and the people who suffer, like it is ordinary citizens, it's citizens like you and me, and just because they're born into the wrong place and they had to suffer. Then, of course, that urge, that yearning for survival, for fair living, fair survival, and just sprouted, and people wanted to leave. People wanted to become exiles and refugees. And so it's multifactorial, yes.
Well, let's put you into the middle of that bigger picture. You're a child. You're 6, 7 years old. What is your life at that point?
Knew nothing other than having fun and with the parents guiding you and protecting you and making sure that you were looked after. And not until the revolution came so close and that when parents were persecuted, and then you realize that we were classified as not acceptable class, not working class, not peasants class, but capitalists because of a grandfather and who was a bankrupt, so a shop owner, happened to be in a small town by the Pearl River Delta. And then we were classified as capitalists. We had nothing other than empty shell of a shop. And at the time,
Where are you in China? Are you in a village? Are you in an urban setting?
it was a small administrative town of Zhongshan. It had about 50,000 people. A nice, small, peaceful town traversed by many rivers, many branches of the Pearl River Delta. And that's where go back nearly 200 years now, the Royal British Fleet sailed up to Canton and forced sell opium to the Chinese people. And we're right there.
You're at the crossroads of a lot of history.
Absolutely. For modern history, that district, the Pearl River district in modern history is pivotal for China. Because of that, and then all of a sudden you hear, you know, and we are growing up and people are jumping on board of foreign boats and they sail away, they work hard, they indenture laborers and so on, and they went, and we call them sojourners. Sojourners. So they'll come to Australia, they come to the New Gold Mountain in Victoria and in Bathurst, somewhere near there.
And they're sending money back, much as many immigrants do today, much as many people do today.
That's right. They supported their poor families behind, and the long separations between spouses. The wife would be staying behind, looking after, minding the children.
When you're a child there, you're a happy family. What are your parents doing, and how many siblings do you have?
I had 3 sisters, 2 older ones and 1 younger ones. Both my parents were university graduate. My father was a high school teacher in town. I was told that he was a high school teacher, but he never had a job as a teacher because they didn't want him.
Right.
So he just did odd jobs and relying so much on and foreign help from a grandfather who left, jumped on board of one of those steamers and heading for the old gold mountain in San Francisco. But sick of the long journey, by the time they got to Hawaii, he jumped boat with his cousin. And they never looked back. So it's exactly 100 years this year.
Oh, right. Okay. So your parents, your father, your mother are persecuted as intellectuals. Were they actually rebellious in any way? Did Mao have any reason to be fearful of your parents?
Well, I don't know. And all we knew was that they need to be re-educated. So they used to go to meetings 4 or 5 times a week after tea at night. And then they would be back about 9:30 or so. And then they would be doing a lot of voluntary labor work around the place. Apparently, their education was not needed for the new society, which Chairman Mao was building up. And people were very illiterate and very uneducated, from our administrators locally to our even school teachers. You finish primary school, you are classified as an intellectual. You finish high school, and then if you done university, then you are a high intellectual. Grandfather was in Hawaii supporting their family back home in China. Mother was fortunate enough, grandfather would insist that girls must be educated. So my mother was actually sent to one of the best universities in China called Fudan in Shanghai, except interrupted by the Japanese invasion. Before long. So anyway.
Yeah, it's a strange time, isn't it? And hard to imagine now. This is when Chairman Mao thinks everybody should be smelting iron in their own backyard and things like this, right?
Right. It's because we were so poor, the whole country was so poor. We had one bus in the whole town. It was a really old diesel bus. And other than that, teachers told us, look, guys, girls, we need to help make a lot of steel. And one day we'll have a train coming through our town and it'll be magnificent. We probably saw a picture of a train, but never been actual on top of one of them.
Never saw the train.
Actually, early on, before that, then in kindergarten and in second grade, we in the whole school as well, we used to go and plant trees because the government would like us to green China, because China wasn't green enough at the time. Plant a lot of hardwood, a lot of eucalyptus trees, gum trees, and one day these would be used as slippers. Now that's something we're hoping, we're contributing, and we felt great. And that is the spirit. It's a revolutionary spirit. We didn't know what it meant, but then we were involved in it, and so on. And making steel, it meant that the whole year you didn't have school. So that was fun.
So what changed? You're part of the revolutionary spirit, as you say. At some point you think this is what China is, as perhaps any child does looking at the life around them. They just assume this is normal and this is what everybody does. So what changed? What disconnected you from that feeling?
When my father was persecuted, his turn came. I must be 7 or 8 years old, and he was accused as being a counter-revolutionary, a non-believer. And yet I sincerely believe that my father was so patriotic. He wanted to stay back. He didn't want to leave China like his friends. A lot of his friends would leave town and went to Macau and Hong Kong. And I suppose another bad thing happened to the family would be the kids in the streets, and they follow us and they threw rocks at us. And then the worst thing, I think, at the end, after many re-education nights and things and camps for a period of time, a few months, a few weeks, then all of a sudden he was sentenced to go to Siberia, to the re-education camp there for 15 years.
Wow.
15 years, and that for a southerner meant a death penalty. Because you never saw snow, you wouldn't know how to survive in the snow, but luckily he did. Yeah.
You also saw something horrific in the street.
Yes, like A lot of us did, yes. And I think that was another horrible thing. We were not supposed to be allowed to witness public execution. And yeah, I just took a bet with a friend and ran off after the truck carrying this dead counter-revolutionary to be shot. And that was horrific, yeah. That would stick in your mind forever. And in my mind, people are genuine and they are nice people. They don't mean to hurt anyone.
So you go from a happy innocence, I suppose, at 6 or 7 or 8 or something like that, so that by the time you're starting to look at your teenage years, 10, 11, 12, you're aware that things are different. Your mother is still there?
Mother was still there. She endured a lot of criticism, including continued re-education.
And so what do they decide to do with you?
As soon as my father came back, survived, they probably wouldn't be able to feed all the prisoners up there. So they released some of the people and they sent him back after nearly 3 years. They say, you can go home now.
Yeah.
So as soon as he came home, and I overheard my parents discuss and say, look, for the family to survive and an opportunity for our children, we need to leave. They then make the decision that we'll try every means to get each one of us off. But I was the lucky one. By the time we got to 1962, it was a height of a famine that later scholars would estimate something like 50 million people die from starvation. At the height of that, I think the local officer in charge, the district head, and he would have very intimate knowledge about every household, every one of us. And he knew that there were 3 girls and I was the only boy. And my mother applied for many years with my sister and myself to leave China. And one day, for some reason, I still don't understand why, I didn't go to school. I followed my mother instead and went to his office. And getting an application form for an exit visa was very hard. And the district head would he would hand my mother 2 forms. And my mother was surprised that, why would you hand me 2 forms? I only needed 1 with my 2 younger children. Oh, he looked at me with a really sad face, and he was himself also suffering, and he was a communist party member. We call them comrades. And he had one quick glance at me and he said, look, try it for luck. Put your son on one by himself. Then that really sent my parents into quite a dilemma.
Isn't that interesting? So it's like an act of compassion in some ways, but it's a warning. He's saying, you better now do something now.
Yes, it was an unspoken message. I couldn't understand it, but only after all these years, 50, 60 years, I thought, this man still had a bit of compassion for his fellow man. What happened then, the very next day, he said to my mother, look, your son can go. But then the night before my father filled up the application form, and I could see that was a heartbreaking dilemma. So mother and father asked me, would you dare to go by yourself? And I said yes. For no reason. Maybe I just tried to please my parents, knowing their hurt and their sadness. And I wasn't allowed to tell anyone because we couldn't get the next bus out of town the next morning. So it would be the day after. So I had to keep it all quiet. Exactly on the 18th of May, 1962, I was put on a bus and on a slow trip to the border to Macau. And there I stayed with my aunt, and I stayed there for about a month.
At this point, you think you're leaving officially as such?
Yes, I would be leaving for good. I wouldn't have a clue when I would be coming home, when I would be seeing my parents and my sisters again. After a few weeks, my father suddenly appeared, and he made his way. He escaped China, so he made it to Macau through the tortuous waterways and in a little fishing junk that would collapse completely. when it reached Macau, it was not seaworthy at all, but they make it, all these 40-something of them, and mainly were school teachers from town. And he couldn't raise the money to pay the organizer. Then the organizer of that trip then threatened to send him back to China to face the bullet, and even took him away for a night somewhere. And eventually they negotiated, settled on a sum, and he was let go in Macau.
Wow.
Then my father straight away and said, look, we got to go to Hong Kong now. Macau is not safe at all. And the organizer, later on, we found out that he was himself a communist member, and he made money out of that. And then, of course, smuggling into Hong Kong at the time in 1962 was open secret. And anyone walk into any butcher shop, any marketplace, any street, you'll be able to find some clue as how to get connection. And there are a lot of people in Macau. If they smuggle in, the United Nations would then give them a new change of clothes and $10 and so on.
Your refugee, the United Nations will say you are refugees at that point. It's probably worth clarifying,
Right.
just reminding ourselves of what Hong Kong was there. Now we're in again, it's such a fascinating time to be having this discussion, isn't it?
Topical,
As Hong Kong is being brought back into China. But Hong Kong at that point is not China at all, is it?
Hong Kong was a colony of England since the Opium War. So it's nearly 100 years or more at the time. The Macau was a Portuguese colony for nearly 400 years at the time. Now it's nearly 500. But cut the story short now, and I just would do what my father guided me to do.
So how were you smuggled to Hong Kong? I mean, again, it's so close. We're not talking big distances, are we? I just always imagine you could jump on a ferry, but it's not that at all, is it?
It was by a small boat, probably, 15 meters long, or maybe smaller, and we call it the Chinese junk, those junks. And the night before we set sail, I was taken to a cheap little lodge where then by midnight there would be a half a dozen other people arriving, and in a couple of nights, and we were then put in a taxi and taken to a lonely, dark beach, and then a little sandpan out of the dark would then take 2 or 3 of us at a time to the waiting boat with a diesel motor. And then came daybreak, then I realized that I was the only child, and there were 2, maybe 3 young, perhaps teenagers, because they looked very much like my older sisters, and a few young men. And we were on deck, and during the day, there were 2 rocks in the South China Sea, and the boat was just moored there for the day until darkness came the following night, and then we set sail into Hong Kong. And I guess by the time when we got near, didn't know for how long, then we were told to get into this little tunnel. And because we call that the snakehead. Snakehead is the leader of the trip, and he spotted me long time ago already in his mind. I think he planned it. And a smaller tunnel on the right-hand side of the boat.
So there's a little tunnel on the boat that you've got to...
Yeah.
So you're going into a compartment sort of thing.
Yes, it would be about this wide, about this high, and enough for a little boy like me to claw in. And he told me, you go all the way to the end.
Wow.
So I just follow order. I just claw in, and then a couple of young girls.
And it's dark, right? It's not...
Oh, it was all dark.
Yeah.
And you can't see until you hit something. And then and then I could feel the water just underneath my bottom, smashing onto the boat. And that was that much separation. The boat in front of me, that was a diesel engine. We could hear the engine as the boat progressed. And the girls were really frightened, and I was too. But I had nobody to talk to, so on. My father was never superstitious or anything. He was supposed to be very progressive. But at the time, he said, father and son should not take the risk together, just in case.
Just in case. Wow.
So he said, look, you go and I'll see you in Hong Kong in next week.
Wow. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? You know, like, and again, you think about now, you think about Australia. Imagine saying to a 12-year-old in Australia, you know, you go, you get on that thing, you leave. I'll have to stay here. I'll come later if I can.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
it's hard for us, you know, in 2022 to get our head into that sort of idea, isn't it? That mindset.
Yes, I agree.
I imagine you are terrified in this tiny, you're in a tiny space, you've got diesel fumes, you've got the water lapping. It sounds horrifying.
Funny, and thinking back, I only worry about the boat capsized and then wondering how could I get out. But then after a little while, you know, you became delirious after a few hours. And then I was waken up by people wearing boots banging on the deck. That must be the water police, the Royal Hong Kong Water Police.
And how long did it take? How long was that journey?
Oh, probably be about 4 or 5 hours.
Right.
But it must be like a lifetime because I don't even remember how did I get out. And apparently someone pulled me out. I must be semi-conscious, maybe with the film that escaped into the tunnel. Later on, I found out that a lot of fares were thrown overboard for one reason or the other, and they drowned.
Wow.
And then, luckily, I woke up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, what happened in Hong Kong?
Fortunately, I had a grandmother there, and she was classified as a landlord. She went through the whole lot of stuff. And then they let her go because China, as I mentioned earlier, was desperately poor and they had nothing. They wanted to modernize China, but they needed foreign currencies. Well, for each family with sojourners overseas, like in Canada, America, Australia, anywhere in the world, the government knew that there would be money sending back, but they couldn't send it directly to China. So they said, right, you have one family member, only one family member would be allowed to go to Hong Kong or Macau. There you can receive the money, then you can send it back to your family, and that becomes the foreign exchange in that way. So the sojourners contributed a lot in the dark days of early China.
Describe the Hong Kong you arrive in and what you experience there. Because I'm imagining Hong Kong's a British colony and you sort of turn up there in the swinging 60s. Were the swinging 60s happening in Hong Kong?
Oh, absolutely. 1962, yes. Arrived there, and then, of course, grandma's radio was blaring in her home. I could listen to the radios, and they have news broadcasts all the time, and then they have these hit songs. Later on, of course, I heard about the Beatles, and I loved them, and the Rolling Stones, and everything follows. And the Searchers, I love those guitar music. When I got to La Salle College, that's when I took up a bit of music myself. Got into a rock band,
Yeah.
as you do.
But Hong Kong must have been incredibly vibrant, I imagine.
Oh,
at that
absolutely,
point.
yes.
It's you know, it was a glamorous destination. It was a sophisticated place.
Yes.
It's a meeting place of the world, isn't
Absolutely. And there are a lot of foreigners, and we often ran into them on the star ferries and crossing the harbor, and I couldn't help myself and go and say, hello, how are you? And then I had no more words to say because I didn't know what to say. So it was great. And then you have the top 100s and hit songs, and you listen to it, and yeah. It was an amazing time.
You become a Western teenager.
Yes, quickly.
So you're then sent to Australia. So from Hong Kong.
Not yet. Grandmother had never an opportunity to go to school. She was the much older generation, and she was quite worried about her budget and thought that perhaps I should get a job as a child laborer somewhere. My second oldest sister, Ping, grandma somehow, because she always had Ping as her companion to lighten my mother's burden in those years, they let her go, but she said, I have to take this grandchild because she grew up with me. So the two of them traveled to Hong Kong, and Ping was already at a school. And my sister, she was really selfless. And she said, no, Grandma, I want my brother to get an education.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you take her place at school.
Well, grandfather in Hawaii said, no, both of you go to school.
Okay. And so you went to school in Hong Kong but ended up in Sydney. How did you get to Sydney?
Right. And yes, I was in a school which the standard was all right, but not really, really good. Then by the time I was in second form, I realized that I really need to go to the best school if I could arrange. And there was this Catholic school run by LaSalle brothers. And it was top school for boys there. And parents would fight so hard to get their sons in. And they're very restrictive, very hard to get in. And they don't take anyone from any year except on year 7 or form 1. So I had no connection. I just rang up, make an appointment to see the principal. Here came the little boy, teenager, in a foreign kind of looking uniform. And the other boys took one glance and they knew that, oh, yeah, look at you like that. Brother was really kind, Brother Casimir. And he said to me, look, explain to me, no, we don't do that. You got to come in through public examination for year 7, for form 1. Anyway, so I kept going back and I thought, no, I really wanted that school. It was just so amazing. Everything, sports, academic records, and so on. After 1 week, and he told the front office no more appointments for this boy. And I was really, really upset. But then I thought, every day, I finished school, I have to travel. My bus would go past this school. And I took a look at it, and it was such a magnificent school, and the boys were so happy. And of course, the other girls would talk to them as well. And so every day I jump off the bus at that school, and I sat outside the principal's office. and really blessed Father Casimir at the end of 5 weeks, and his door suddenly opened. Come in. I thought, I have told you many times not to come back. You're a pain in the neck. I remember what he told me exactly. I said, brother, I only want to come to your school. I really would like to, please. All of a sudden, he stared at me. All right, I'll give you 1 term, 6 months to try. If you can't catch up, you got to go. Oh, so and it was such amazing. So the rest is history. He took interest in my progress at school. And sure enough, the standard was hugely different. There are 40 boys in the class. I was 37 the first month. Every month, the tests on every subject. And head principal would come in and dish out your report cards and telling you have to improve on this and that. He didn't say a thing, and I felt bad. And then gradually, towards the end of the year, I got to number 7.
Pretty good.
And then he was really happy.
He's going, yeah. And so how'd you get to Sydney?
Oh, right. Now, my personal story, it kind of so entwined with political situation. 1976 in Hong Kong, it was a really terrible year with a lot of protests, a lot of violence, including setting bombs, 8,500 bombs set all over the colony to frighten the foreigners out of the colony. And there would be a strip of paper, stick to it in Chinese, compatriots do not touch. But little children don't know. It looks nice. They touch the parcel and then they blew apart. So there are 30-odd people die as a result of that. And then unbeknown to us, then it was also the start of the Cultural Revolution in mainland China. So with this, after 6 months of this sort of life, and so many times we were evacuated with bomb scare from buses or even at our school because it was a foreign school. My father again, by then, reestablished himself as a school teacher. He said, look, son, we need to go. Perhaps you would like to go overseas to go to school. A lot of foreign boys at our school heard a lot about Australia, heard about the world, heard about England and America and all these places from different brothers from different nations. And I thought, So I raised that with grandfather. I quite liked that because father couldn't afford to send me overseas. Grandfather was near retirement and he was not well physically. And he said, look, why don't you come to Hawaii? Come to America. There'll be family here looking after you, supporting you. By then, I was a lot older and more mature and watching all this going on and thought I really wanted to be by myself and find my own way. I was confident enough. And La Salle College gave me the courage to face the world. England was so far and so cold. Canada's same. In America, I didn't want to bother my relatives and uncles and cousins there. So I said, look, what about Australia? That's how we decided on Australia. But then whichever boarding school would accept me at a reasonable price, then I would come. I nearly ended up in Tamworth, De La Salle, that school there. But then I ended up in Holy Cross at Ryde.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful school.
Fantastic. What a journey so far. Look, after school, you then study medicine. I mean, what a leap, what a great leap forward from, the famine of those years, from the China of that year to your at medicine at Sydney. You go to the University of Sydney?
I went to New South Wales.
New South Wales, yeah.
In those days, we were the newer ones, and
Yeah.
the Sydney boys would say, "Oh, New South Wales."
Yeah.
But but we had great time at New South Wales. And those days, there were a lot of overseas students around. They all wanted to do medicine, most of them, anyway. That was my childhood dream. I thought, I look around, I went through all this hardship, and I felt so lucky, fortunate, given opportunities everywhere, every step of my life. And I thought I like to do something, just for my people around, and strangers or no strangers. I just want to be a doctor. I'll be able to help whatever. And so I set my mind on medicine. But fortunately enough, I broke through the quota. I think it was 5% of the year were allocated to foreign students. And among the foreign students at the time, the competition was really high.
Yeah, yeah.
However, I got in and...
And you met your wife while you were there as well?
Yeah, 1976 or 70, early 76.
Right.
And she was such a gorgeous girl. But I never set eyes on girls in those days, James.
You had study to do.
Yes, I was one-track mind. I had to put my study as number one priority. Also at the time, when I got to uni, I told my father, please do not borrow money and send money to support me. I'll support myself. And I work part-time throughout the 6th year. And I work every school holiday as a nurse at Concord Hospital. Yeah, I remember so well that Sister Flower, her name was. And she would write every year, every holiday, would say, Andrew, would you be coming back? We want you to come back. And there were about a dozen medical students those days working on school holidays, especially Christmas.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because everybody else is gone.
Triple pay. and 2.5 on Boxing Days.
Tell me about what happened to your mother and father. It was years until you saw your mother again.
A long time. Poor mother. Mother suffered a lot. Of course, the district head must be so upset by the fact that mother didn't stop in my father's intention to escape.
Right.
So basically, she was sent to a re-education camp for 3 months with my older sister because they did not report my father to the authorities.
Yeah.
And if they did, then father would be executed for being counter-revolutionary. So that's sort of situation. So she was amazing, and she just put up with it. She just put up. She would be just doing whatever meetings. They would bring her up in front of everyone to criticize her in the neighborhood.
And you saw her again here? Did she come to Australia?
I saw her again when I finished university in 1976 at the end of the year. And I was waiting for my result to come out. And Sister Flower's letter was there. Are you coming back, Andrew? And I was delighted to inform her to write back and say, Sister, I'm going to take a holiday and see my father in Hong Kong. And also, I decided to go and see my mother because in 1976, after Chairman Mao passed on, the moderates came on, maybe Deng Xiaoping, Chairman Deng. Everything seemed to be different. And the administrators in Pearl River Delta area, they welcome people to come back. And in Hong Kong, you hear stories that they don't persecute you and they allow you to come in and out. So I decided I'd make a trip. So I went back to China to see mother for the first time when I finished uni. Yeah, so that would be 14 years after I left. Yeah, 14 years.
Wow. I just can't imagine, because there'd be so much emotion in that, wouldn't there? There's so much emotion, so much history in that.
Yes. It was a change of guards in China, and it was a change of attitudes in ordinary people in China. Their hope was of survival, a fair life, search, and they were so happy, so much happier, but they still wanted to leave. And one of my cousins, very close to me, as we were young together as kids, he was so depressed, absolutely depressed, and at the age of 20 something. And so I promised him I'll bring him out. I'll take him out one day. So I did eventually. Yes.
I mean, you talk about it beautifully now. You know, like this has been a great conversation. You've written a book called One Bright Moon. Were you always able to talk about it? Was there a long period where you didn't talk about this experience?
I talk about the fun part of my childhood with my children. As in those days, we pay pilgrimage up to the Gold Coast for a holiday once a year with the kids. Then they get bored in a car, and then I'll start the little stories about fishing, about doing all sorts of things, including stealing fish from the commune's fish pond because we were so starved and so hungry, and pull a vegetable in the dark because there was no food. It was not until the year 2000 when they were all grown up and off our hands, and I decided I should write down as a story to let the children know so that they have a record. Itself is a story. It was just one of those things that year 2000, by then we already met up with father and mother and so on and so forth. Then we would go to Washington, D.C., where my second sister, Ping or Fanny, lived. And year 2000, by then, the younger sister, Anne, and the older sister, Grace, and they all were allowed to leave China. They settled in D.C. area. And my sister lived in a place called Potomac. It's just slightly out of town, and it's really nice and tranquil, a lot of open spaces. And I woke up year 2000, as you know, year 2000 is such a phenomenal time. And as usual, I got up before dawn, and in the darkness, gradually the lights filtered through, and I could see little families of deers racing in so peaceful outside, so beautiful. And that made me think of what I went through and what my parents did for me.
This is we usually end this with a sort of question about we call the series No Regrets, that you look at your life and there's maybe a central moment that you go, well, that was the turning point and I don't have any regrets about that. You're sort of describing something a little different, isn't it? Because there was so much of your life had a momentum determined by the larger events or by decisions made by others. I wonder how you reflect on a sense of regrets or not regrets.
It took me quite a while really to understand the whole thing, even though I wrote it so many times and took me so long. I don't regret taking time to do it properly because I wasn't a born writer, even though secretly I always wanted to be a writer. So year 2000, when I came back to Australia and I took up community writing courses, and from there went on to writing New South Wales as a member, and from there I got fellowships up to Varuna, learning the techniques and skills, and how to present stories. And as I do many editions, re-editions, and rewriting, I realized that I don't get angry. I don't get angry. I never did. I thought the first thing is my father before I left it, and he would tell me at a bus stop, don't be angry. You need your energy ahead. So anger consumes your energy. You got hands. You go and work hard. You got eyes. You got a brain. So I always remember that. And that in my book, One Bright Moon, I just wrote it through the eyes of a boy growing up, watching, seeing everything going on with totally innocence, through his innocent eyes and everything. My book, in fact, is like a kind of debrief to myself. And I never let it kind of upset me, my experience, to hold me back. And writing it, of course, sometimes you get really emotional and upset, but it's a debrief. To me, it is a remedial experience that I didn't intend to seek in the first place. And not just for myself and my family and compatriots. There hundreds of millions of people went through what I went through, what my family went through. And the common people, the citizens of the community and the humanity itself suffer because of these things going on beyond our control.
I think what you've done is by telling your story, and this is, so often what happens, if somebody can tell their truth, their individual story so powerfully, it becomes universal. You're describing the universal experience of so many people in that situation. So it's a beautiful, powerful thing that you've done. I've certainly got no regrets from having this conversation with you. It's been fantastic, Andrew Kwong, and thank you so much for being part of No Regrets. And all the best. I'm sure there's adventures still to come.
Certainly, I had no regret coming to Australia. Thank you very much for having me.
In the next episode of Life's Booming, ever wondered what it's like to be a nun? Sister Christine Henry thought she was ready to get married, settle down and have kids. But as she was on the way to shop for an engagement ring, something made her turn to her husband-to-be and ask him to stop and pull over. Thanks for listening in to this episode of Life's Booming, No Regrets. If you've loved this story as much as I did, don't forget to tell all your friends, in person and online. We'd love it if you left us a review. Of course, if you've got a great story of your own, drop us a line, lifesbooming@seniors.com.au. I'm James Valentine. I'll speak with you next time.